Okay, good morning, everyone. This talk starts at 11:30. It is Change the Mindset. Availability is the driving factor. Presenting is Randy Petersen. Randy Petersen serves as the SCADA superintendent at the San Jacinto River Authority, overseeing network and server infrastructure, programming, and cybersecurity to industrial control systems. He's active OT cybersecurity leader, co-founding the SCADA user group, and contributing to the TAWWA, or TAWA, Resiliency and Cybersecurity Committee. He's got 13 years of operational technology experience with a strong focus on networking and cybersecurity, as well as a diverse technical background, including experience in data extraction, database management, operating system deployment, and system recovery prior to joining SJRA. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you. All right, so David kicked us off this morning, and I absolutely loved it because he was talking about critical infrastructure. Imagine, the typhoon campaigns. Imagine you get up in the morning, the lights don't work, turn on the water, there's no water flowing, you can't get cell service because critical infrastructure just doesn't exist anymore. Something has happened. It's a scary thought. That's, the plot of most of the doomsday movies that are out there, that disruption to availability. In that scenario, do I really care that somebody has my bank account information? Yeah, that kind of sucks. I'm not happy about that, but I'm more concerned with why I can't get water, why I can't get electricity, why, I hate to say it, why my AC is not running and it's hot as can be in Texas. So when we start talking about these OT environments, we really have to shift and focus on that availability aspect, because the expectation really is that critical infrastructure in these services, they have to be available for people 24/7. We can't let them go down, and unfortunately there are adversaries that are going to target those systems because they know the damage that widespread disruption to critical infrastructure will do. So that's kind of the whole idea behind this this is why availability is so important in your OT network. So I like to have the interaction. I like having a little bit of fun with this and kind of getting a read of the room a little bit. Who in here is on the IT side of the house? Everybody knows you got two sides of the house, right? Or hopefully you do. If you have a flat network, different conversation. Let's talk afterwards, and let me tell you why that's really, really bad. So a couple on the IT, who's on the OT side of the house? A couple more? Anybody have no idea what OT stands for and they're realizing they are probably in the wrong room? Nobody. Yes, everybody's here to see me. Great. And my boss is shaking his head like, oh God, who let this guy on the loose? But a little bit of fun, but generally you have two different networks and two different environments running in an organization where you're critical infrastructure. You have your business networks. This is things like SharePoint. This is your payroll systems, your HR systems. Email, internet access, it's what you use to go out there and teach yourself how to do something on YouTube. Learning on YouTube has become a real thing. But generally, a little bit of disruption to those systems is tolerated. It's okay. Hey, SharePoint's going to be down for an hour or two, while we work on it. No big deal. I jump over, I check some emails, I do some other things. Life continues, SharePoint comes back up, everything's okay. Then you've got the pumps, the motors, the PLCs, the pressure transmitters, the level sensors, all the things that are running your process. They're tying back into your PLCs, your HMIs, your remote terminals. This is what makes a product at the end of the day, and honestly, what generally generates the revenue. So maybe this is, in my case, wastewater treatment. Maybe this is producing oil and gas, producing electricity. Maybe this is a manufacturing process where you're making a good that you can then sell. This is your operational side of the house, and this is what we're talking about when we're saying it needs to run 24/7. It's extremely costly when operational technology systems go down and when those services are interrupted. So we've got to hit some of the big headlines we remember. Going back, we still talk about Stuxnet, still fascinated with Stuxnet. We look at black energy and the attacks that happened in Ukraine, where you're talking hundreds of thousands of people without power. That's a huge interruption. That affected people's lives. Availability in OT means public safety. It means human life. Triton, that happened in 2017, they targeted safety systems. This was the first known attack that went directly after that human life aspect. It takes a certain kind of jerk to do that. Then we all know a couple years ago, Colonial Pipeline. The impact that had when there was this loss of availability. All of a sudden, fuel distribution is interrupted. So sometimes what happens is we start reasoning, well, these are big guys. Nobody's targeting me. Nobody's going after me because I'm not a colonial pipeline, So being in water, I pull a little bit from water. We look at some of these smaller towns, smaller things that happened, going back to Florida, attempting to overdose chemical. I remember about 10,000%, I believe, on that one. Because of availability, an operator was actually able to catch that and adjust those values before that ever hit the distribution system. Imagine a 10,000% overdose in chemicals making it out into a water distribution system. At that point, you can't recall that water. You can't get that back. That would be catastrophic. Availability stopped that. Pennsylvania, they went after PLCs, pressure transmitters, and that. They affected the availability of that system. They had to go in manual operations on that. Texas here, local one that was hit, small utility where they overflowed the tanks. And then we had one in Indiana and Arkansas, all affecting availability of these systems, forcing these manual operations. Availability is a big deal. The same guys that are going after the colonial pipelines, they'll hit the little guys too. They don't care. And then you introduce ransomware. That ransomware is indiscriminate. It will go after any system it can get a hold of. So sometimes we fool ourselves thinking, well, maybe we're a smaller organization and nobody's going to target me. But that's really not the case. And this is kind of the proof of that even the smaller systems, we have to recognize the importance of availability, and we've got to prioritize that and take certain steps. There's 23 groups based on the last year in review report, 23 advanced persistent threats. These are the big guys, state-sponsored, state-backed. They have a ability, so not just the interest, but they have the ability to get into a OT environment and start making modifications, start taking those systems offline if they choose. And the scary part is they're living in critical infrastructure already. In some cases, we found them as far back as 5 years living off the land in critical infrastructure. They know what they're doing. Ransomware, we talked about it, indiscriminate. It'll hit anybody it can. There's now 80 groups that are targeting industrial control systems with ransomware. Ransomware is a direct link to availability. All of a sudden, those systems are gone. Those controls are gone. You cannot access anything. You're going back to manual operations. Hopefully, you can go back to manual operations. Both these numbers are increasing every year. So the threat's not going away. How do we deal with that? Why do we need OT cyber? We're going to talk about kind of this shift into availability. We've already mentioned a little, but that is the goal of your OT network, making sure that critical infrastructure is available 24/7. That really comes into play when we start designing these. We start looking at the maintenance of these and what the life cycle is going to be in our OT network. We've got to think about availability in all three of these categories. And if you don't know them already, we're going to hit the 5 critical controls because those all protect that availability aspect. Every OT program needs to have those 5 critical controls in place. So, goal of the OT network, and this is where we kind of really get into this shift and these differences. So, if we came up, especially those in the IT side of the house, you're probably used to the CIA triangle. Everybody in here, I'm assuming, has probably heard the CIA triangle at some point. You've got confidentiality. In your IT network, that is generally the most important thing. You're protecting PII. Like I mentioned, I don't want my bank account on the dark web. I don't want my social security number out there. If confidentiality in your IT network, your HR system gets compromised, that's a bad day. That's a really bad day. Then you've got integrity, and finally you've kind of got that availability aspect. You know, if services are unavailable over the weekend, you know, I can't access the web portal for my bank. You know, okay, slight inconvenience, I can live with it. I can't get on SharePoint. SharePoint's down. You know, I need a shop drawing or something, or an as-built document off SharePoint. It's a small, slight inconvenience, but I can work around it and life keeps going. As we move into this OT mindset, we kind of rotate that triangle a little bit. So all of a sudden you've got availability on top, because availability means public safety. It means health. It means that people go home at the end of the day. It also means environmental protections in there. So availability comes first and foremost. Then we've got kind of the integrity piece. We need to know that the numbers we're seeing on our screens and our level transmitters, our pressure transmitters, we need to know that those are the actual numbers. And lastly, you've got confidentiality kind of at the bottom, because what does 5.3 mean? It could be anything. And that's kind of what OT is about. You have to give that number a context. Is that 5.3 mean sea level? Is that 5.3 PSI? Is that 5.3 MGD, million gallons a day, that we're pumping? The number by itself really doesn't mean all that much. So if somebody knows I have a 5.3, okay, there's not much they can do with that. Now, if it's a 3-digit dash 2-digit dash 4-digit, yeah, that's a familiar pattern. I probably know what that is. So OT, we need that context. Now, we talk about, you know, the web portal being down for the weekend. Imagine you tell people, well, I'm going to start, you know, we're going to take our control system down for the weekend because we need to run some server updates, so we're not going to be able to treat water this weekend. It's just not acceptable. We don't have that luxury in a OT environment. We've got to run those environments 24/7. And that's where we start getting into kind of the design and the maintenance and the life cycle of these OT networks. So, you know, the IT design, a lot of ITs, we're seeing a lot more cloud services nowadays. So you've got systems as a service, you've got all these things up in the cloud. You've probably got databases on the other side of the country. I'm going to let Google, Amazon maintain that infrastructure, and, you know, I just pay them a nice little, you know, fee every month for it. They handle the maintenance, patches in some case. It's great. We see a lot of VPNs, a lot of remote connectivity here. You know, I've got email, Teams, everything else on my phone, and it's with me wherever I go so I can do things and work. A lot of hierarchical designs. There's a certain degree of redundancy because we do want availability in our OT or in our IT networks, but not a overwhelming degree of redundancy. We may not have duplicate servers or running two identical tasks. A little downtime is tolerated in that environment. It's okay. As we shift into the OT, that goes away because of that prioritization of availability. I now have a very high degree of redundancy. For my architectures, I'm introducing things like full mesh topologies. Yes, they're very expensive, but they offer a very high degree of redundancy. If I lose a connection, somebody cuts a fiber line, not a big deal. I've got 4 other paths that I can reroute. I introduce different technologies. So we may have fiber lines going out for our primary communication method, but then I also have radio backup on that, maybe even a cell backup on that, so that I have multiple paths back to maybe my SCADA data center, just in case something happens. We don't see a lot of cloud because I need those services available. So I'm generally running things on-prem. If the internet goes out, somebody cuts the fiber line, a tree falls on the main line coming into the plant, it's not that big a deal. It's self-contained. The plant can continue to run, in my case, continue treating water and wastewater. There is no interruption to that service because it all lives right there on site. So that's where we kind of start shifting around in design a little bit. We mentioned this, and we're going to dive into it a little bit more, the maintenance aspects. Anybody in here used to maybe like a Tuesday, Patch Tuesday, IT maintenance nights? You get those like 2 a.m. server updates you're doing because nobody else is in the office, nobody's online using those services. In the IT world, that is great. It means that when all those people are in office, there is no inconvenience of losing my internet connection. You know, I might have a dual home system, I have to do an update, takes them both down for some reason. That's okay. Maintenance is generally accepted, tolerated pretty well. I'm pulling down the latest patches from Microsoft or maybe another vendor because I want that hard exterior that keeps adversaries out. Now, as we shift into the OT world, that's a little less common. Anybody here seen a bad patch from a vendor? I don't want to say a name. I see a couple hands going up. Absolutely. What happens in a control system if you roll out that bad patch and all of a sudden all your systems come up with a blue screen of death? That's a really bad day. So when we start talking about OT maintenance, we may let those patches run in our IT environment for 2-3 months before we even consider bringing them into an OT environment. Once we've seen them, we've tested them in our IT environment, we know that everything's running smooth, maybe we roll that out to a test group, something on our DMZ in our OT environment, and we let that run, we let that sit and say, okay, everything's good, it's tolerating it pretty well. Time to start patching the inside servers. Well, the time changed. IT maintenance, we're generally doing after hours. Your OT staff may go home at the end of the day. So they may actually ask, and I've seen this one, they want those OT patches done in the morning after the operators have come in, checked their systems, done their rounds, they know the system is running smooth, everything looks okay, but I want full staff, full operational staff here on site just in case something happens. So we're pushing out our patches middle of business hours. We've got redundant servers here. So, you know, it costs a little bit more, but I've got server A and server B. Their job is the exact same thing. So I'm going to take server A down, let server B run the plant. I'm going to patch server A. I'm going to see if those patches work well, see if everything comes back up. If it comes back up and it runs good for a week, maybe I try to flip over and push all the data onto that server. Now I can start working on server B because I've got to ensure that 24/7 operations is continuing. I can't have those interruptions. So redundancy in hardware, redundancy in virtualization here, it allows me to take these down one at a time to do maintenance. That's how we essentially give ourselves a maintenance window without having maybe that kind of traditional maintenance window where the system is down. So availability, again, coming in here, a little bit different mindset when we're approaching the maintenance aspect. And finally, life cycles. Another one where I like to have a little fun in here. Any iPhone users in the room? iPhones? Okay. Do we have more Android people in the room? Yeah. Actually, maybe more iPhone. Who's got the oldest phone in the room? Can anybody beat an iPhone 10? Anybody go older? Older than like a Galaxy S21, S22? Why not? Can't get updates. What's your average life cycle on things like cell phones that you're running? We up 2 years? I mean, I know people upgrade every single year. Our business laptops, even business servers, we're looking at 3-year life cycles, 5 years if we're stretching it a little bit. Anybody in here have an original iPhone or original Galaxy? I actually pulled an original Galaxy out and recycled it the other day. I thought I did that years ago. Why won't we run that hardware? It's too old. It's not secure anymore. It doesn't get security updates, patches, but those devices are 17, 18 years old right now. That's the expected life cycle in OT. 15 years is kind of the minimum. A lot of our devices, we're pushing 20 years. So how do we secure that? It's not getting updates anymore. So now we've got to start looking at compensating controls. How can we mitigate the risk to these devices? I was talking with an incident responder earlier this year. Nothing related to us, thankfully. But she told me that she was out working on a building automation system. The core of that building automation systems was a Windows NT PC. Anybody remember the year of Windows NT? Close. 1993. We are talking about over 30 years old, and that was the core critical piece of their building automation system. How do you secure that? How do you ensure that 30 years later that is still running? So this was kind of been an interesting shift I've seen in the past few years in OT, where at first it was all physical. We did not like virtualization. It was bad. But now we're looking to virtualize certain things just because that hardware is getting so old. Virtualization allows us to get that on newer hardware, keep that running, and extend that life cycle. A lot of our network infrastructure, these industrial line switches, they're designed to last 15 years out there. PLCs, they're designed for this. A lot of times they don't get the latest and greatest though. So similar to what's been mentioned, that Windows NT system, we've got to look at mitigating factors, compensating controls. Can we block those port services that are being exploited, at a firewall level? Block it. Do we have proper zones and conduits to control that and protect those systems? So focusing on availability again here, we realize that we've got to shift to that focus in order to keep these OT systems running, because OT systems, it means public health, it means safety. So that long life cycle is kind of an interesting thing that comes into play. What allows us to protect that availability for those long, 15, 20 years are things like the 5 critical controls. So again, I love the interaction. Anybody here anybody unfamiliar? First time hearing 5 critical controls? Everybody knows them well, I take it? Oh, we've got a few that know. So this is what protects availability in your OT system. Do you have a defensible architecture? We joked about the flat network at the beginning. Flat network means if there's a compromise anywhere, I can see every other thing. It doesn't take adversaries long to figure out what are OT devices and what are IT devices. And if they see them on your network, I guarantee they will go after those devices. And those are generally older OT devices, going off on a tangent, are almost insecure by design. They're designed to accept read and write commands. So defensible architectures, proper network segmentation, proper zones and conduits, that is how we protect with architecture. We get into OT network visibility and monitoring, the second control. General IT tools are great in an IT environment. The problem is they can be very intrusive and they can take down your OT systems. That's why we see so much passive in OT systems. Believe it or not, I had this conversation 2 days ago. Someone did not realize that doing a full ping sweep of an entire network range in an OT environment was a very bad idea. What happens when it hits a device that does not handle that and it locks up that device? That's a very bad day, and that's why we rely a lot on passive. Now, there are some really cool technologies out there that they're starting to explore what they can do safely with active scanning and active polling. But generally, we rely on visibility. We want to know what the normal is in our system so that if we see the abnormal, if we see the anomaly, that's what we can focus in and go investigate. Secure remote access. Phishing is still the biggest attack out there. Phishing is still how they harvest all these credentials, and unfortunately, there is a ton of credential reuse. And even if you have proper network segmentation, there's a good chance that the operator is using the same password for his IT environment as he is his OT environment. And if you don't have any kind of trust between those, that's very hard to control. You can put in policies that say don't do that, but people still do. Introducing secure remote access technologies, ZTNA technologies, multi-factor authentication, that can help mitigate a lot of that. That helps protect that availability, because if people get access to that system, especially threat actors, they have the possibility to cause disruption. Risk-based vulnerability management. Some of these legacy devices, they are critical components. We need to protect them. How do we protect them? Compensating controls. Those get costly. So we need to know where we focus our efforts. We need to focus in on those key components, those critical systems. We may have auxiliary processes in our plant that are not absolutely vital to the production of, say, water or wastewater. We don't need to protect those the same way we do the core process. And finally, OT incident response plan, because this is going to look very, very different than a traditional IT incident response plan. We're focusing on business continuity, that availability, getting those systems back up. So where we may traditionally do an investigation first, examine the artifacts if there is an incident, then we start worrying about restoration of those systems, we flip that in OT. So we're going straight into restoring those systems, getting those systems back up online, so that we can get that plant back online and producing whatever the end product is. We have to preserve those artifacts, offload those artifacts, so that we can circle back after the restoration now to do the examination of those artifacts. And then once we know where the hole was, how they got in, then maybe we can remedy that and look at reconnecting those systems. So 5 critical controls. If you don't have them in place, make sure you get those in place today. Super important. These protect your availability in your OT network. So how do we wrap all this up? Threat actors are out there. Bad actors going to act. My kid loves it when he thinks that's the funnest thing to say in the world. But they're out there. Every year these threats grow. There are more and more people that are starting to understand OT environments, how to affect those systems, and they realize the damage that can be done if they target OT systems, critical infrastructure. We mentioned it. Imagine, the social impact of no electricity, no water, no gasoline at the pump. That has a huge impact on a nation's ability to respond to anything on our daily lives. IT and OT are not the same thing. So I got we have some of San Jacinto, we have some of our IT guys out here as well. I absolutely love our IT guys. They are the front line of defense in many cases because they stand between us, traditional Purdue model, between us, the OT system, and the internet. They're right there in the middle. They take the brunt of things. Love our OT guys. They do our IT guys. They do a fantastic job, but they're not OT. You need people that also know OT and know how to secure OT and are going to focus on that availability aspect. Have them work together. When they both work together, that is when you're set up the best to handle anything that's going to come at you. Not the same thing, but got to love them and respect them both for what they do. OT network availability ensures public safety. That's why we prioritize availability. That's why it's so important. At the end of the day, we're about our communities. A lot of us do this because we care, and we want everybody to go home safe at the end of the day. We don't want to see the headlines of catastrophes from critical infrastructure going down. So that availability is going to play into when we go through design, maintenance, life cycle of our OT systems, and 5 critical controls. That's what we need to have in place. If we don't have those in place, we don't have the budget for those. Hopefully we're going back tonight, sending an email that, hey, I got to get these in place, or later this week we're having those meetings saying we've got to get these 5 critical controls in place. So that's it for me. I'll open it up for if anybody's got some questions.
Testing. Here we go.
We got it.
Hang on a second. Hang on, buddy. Hang on.
He's coming.
Sorry. Thank you for the presentation. You talked about the need for redundancy in order to have availability. To what extent would you recommend diversity in your vendors so that if there's one vendor's device or equipment that's compromised, your redundant one is not subject or vulnerable to that same compromise?
Yeah. I think a lot of these come back, how much are you willing to spend? Because you also have to have people now that are trained in both these different vendors, how to work with them. So whether it's, I don't know if you have a specific piece of equipment in mind, whether it's, the PLCs, I've got to have somebody now that knows Rockwell and somebody now that knows Siemens. If it's your firewalls, I've got to have somebody that knows, Palo Alto. I've got to have somebody that knows a Fortinet or a Cisco. Redundancy, as far as having multiple vendors in there, is absolutely fantastic. I would tell you, do as much as you can stomach, budget-wise and staff-wise. It's great to have a little bit of both, or at least two different, kind of vendors in there for equipment. But it's going to come down to what can your staff support.
I'll take it a little bit further, and not just as far as redundancy in vendors, but physical mechanisms. Like the Ukrainian power outage was restored because they were still able to go physically reset breakers and valves. And, if you're putting in a breaker that you cannot physically control, you have to have the computer, that's a vulnerability. If you have a valve that can only be controlled by the computer, that's a vulnerability. How do you ensure is that one of the critical controls that you always have a human that can go do that?
Yeah. So we've had some conversations about even when we were, first going down this path of, process automation, control systems of, is that going to replace physical operators? And it's like, no, absolutely not, because you absolutely still need those, operators that can go out there and flip that breaker, that can go out there and start that pump, stop that pump manually, that can adjust dosages manually. So I've seen where some newer vendors on package systems, in order to protect some of the equipment, even the manual hand operation switch has to run through the PLC. To me, that's very scary because, what if that PLC is compromised? That means I cannot run that pump truly in hand. So I am a huge advocate for have old school relay technology in there. Have your hand controls completely separate from your automation system. Sure, you want to know that pump's in hand, but I shouldn't have to rely on a PLC, HMI, anything like that, anything technological or connected to run that pump in hand. And I need the staff to do it if we have to fall back to manual operations.
Hey, Jacob Marsloff with Armexa. So you've mentioned budget a few times, which is always an issue, right? So wondered if you had any tips and tricks for communicating the need for the budget, maybe for a typical audience that doesn't necessarily prioritize cybersecurity or kind of just sees it as insurance and doesn't want to make the investment. Yeah.
I think one of the greatest ways to secure budget is to see really bad things happen, unfortunately. Hopefully it's not to you, but when we see those headlines, that's a great way to start that conversation of, if we don't do something, that could be us. And then for me, it's all about kind of proving that ROI. Because OT control systems in general, OT cyber systems, I joke you add the word industrial and the cost goes up 10-fold. And it kind of does. We kind of laugh because there's some truth to it. It can be very expensive. And so having a solid model where, look, we're protecting this equipment, this is what the cost of that equipment does, but also tying in things like, here's the public perception, here's the impact it could have if these systems go down. Having those conversations, having kind of a cyber champion that can talk with your management staff, getting management involved even in things like QSecCon out here, that they can then go and fight and explain this to the board. Because chances are your board and even your senior executives, they're going to know what that cost is if production stops, and what that impact will be. So sometimes it's just kind of helping make that connection of, sure, we think cyber, and it was touched on a little bit in the last talk, that, it's hard to kind of connect maybe that cost. Well, are we really doing too much? We haven't been affected by a cyber incident. So you're asking me for $1 million for, cyber tools when there hasn't been a need for those. Why is there a need all of a sudden? And that goes down into the digital transformation talk and all of that, but helping them kind of connect those dots to appreciate, well, you may not see this kind of that ROI immediately. Hopefully we never need a lot of this cyber stuff, but having that protection is something we can't go without, because if something does happen, the impact is too large. Thank you.
Scott Howard with Megan Inc. I'd seen this at a couple of different customer sites. So one of the 5 controls is continuous monitoring of the OT network. I've seen in some cases on the production network where if even 100 milliseconds of latency is introduced due to any kind of continuous scanning or monitoring, it can bring down the whole process. I'm interested in what your response would be, is whether you continue to go down the OT cyber, securing the network in terms of availability, or pressing the brakes and trying to redesign the whole network. Where does it go? Where would it go in that scenario in your mind? Because speaking in terms of availability.
Yeah. So I and this gets into kind of that active versus passive thing, where a lot of traditional IT tools, because I came from an IT background that I was used to, things like SNMP, where I'm sitting there and I'm polling devices, requesting information, traditional IPS appliances where they are in the middle of that process, and even deep packet inspection that can introduce a lot of that latency in there. Those aren't necessarily tolerated in OT, like you mentioned. That can absolutely bring down a system. That's why you see so many, I think, passive tools where you've got either some sort of network tap or you've got a span port that really does not introduce any of that latency. It's not in a direct communication path. Instead, I'm feeding it all this data for it to chew through, process all that metadata, create a baseline of what normal looks like in my system.
Yeah.
So I may know that, well, this gig link has 567 megabits a second going over it normally. All of a sudden, I start seeing that spike every single night at 2 a.m. Well, now there's an anomaly that I need to go look at and I need to understand. The passive systems aren't going to affect that process and do anything with that.
So partial inventory and expected traffic is better than none at that point. Got it.
And you get into kind of sensor placement and how to best capture a lot of that. I actually am a fan of active scanning in certain cases. We can. Well, let's chat. It's a fun one.
Hi, this is Amar from Propellic Cybersecurity. I see a lot of use cases, and I work with oil and gas and transit agencies, public transit agencies, where the OT folks are basically, the OT security folks are primarily IT. They're all coming from the network backgrounds. So you mentioned that IT is not equal to OT.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I recently attended OT SCADACon in Houston as well. All of the OT folks were SCADA engineers, ignition, PLCs, all that kind of stuff. They do not primarily understand the TCP/IP stack, right? And that's where your OT network runs on. And that's where the high availability, people are talking about, hey, I want to access my plant from my cell phone. So user experience versus that, and that's where the IT folks are primarily the security engineers where it comes to OT network or OT security. So what are the things do you recommend when it comes to saying that IT is not OT? So what are the things that people should do in IT security folks to understand the OT requirement? Or do we need a seasoned SME for OT security?
If you find a good answer to that, let me know.
I've got a good one. Are you ready?
Oh, no. Okay. All right.
Okay, so has it ever happened to you, or have you seen where, I'm just going to call it OT, let's call it a separate system, which it is, running, you mentioned Windows NT, all these older platforms. Have you ever seen it where the IT team takes some of those old applications, emulates them so that they can run on their virtual environment, and therefore now they are the person responsible because they've moved that onto some virtual platform?
I have not personally seen that one. I would
You could
I
see it.
guarantee it exists probably somewhere. We have actually done similar in our OT environments, where we have used virtualization so that we can run older Windows versions, older software.
Let me ask you this. Would you consider emulation, being able to emulate that old thing on some new platform, tomato? It doesn't improve the security of it. It doesn't improve the unpatchability of it.
If that's something I need that is critical to the process, I would absolutely consider emulating that. Now I'm going to look at compensating controls. Again, can I block certain ports? Can I block outside access to it, just to make sure that it can't be exploited? Going back to the question on the personnel, that's a challenge. I happen to be one that I got interested in OT. And I think as we get more and more IT people kind of exposed to OT, we're going to find a few that really want to be kind of in this niche environment where it's kind of fun and exciting. I like the mission of it more than just being traditional, IT kind of data server. I like that I get to get out in the plant sometimes. I like that I'm dealing with water and introducing this physics component of things. So I think as we get more and more exposure to it, getting people together, cross-training a lot of things, I think we're going to see a bigger, OT skill set come out of that. But
Well, thank you very much. My name is Jean, and it's slightly to answer. Back then, when I was working for MSP, well, I also work in OT these days, but I'm from an IT background. So I used to work for an MSP. Back then, I didn't know what really OT was or meant.
Yeah.
So we used to, as an MSP, not even the main, IT company or, entity of that company. So we used to remote into a Windows server, and that Windows server was emulating another older version of Windows, so we could take care of an application that was running something like AS400 for IBM. That was an application back in the 1985, 1987. Yeah. Well, now my question is, since these days most accounts are cloud-based or cloud-related, so also knowing that confidentiality is actually, at the bottom of the CIA triad in OT, would you consider, or what is your take when it comes to redundancy? It's a little tricky question. So would you consider, like a company or something like that, to have, when it comes to IAM platform, since again, most accounts these days are cloud-based, would you consider or advise a company to have, double or let's say two vendors, to handle their IAM platforms? Just in case one fails, and they need, mostly for remote management, of course.
Sorry, say that last part again, for what management?
Remote management, like
Remote
remote access. Yes, because when you're trying to move into something, you have to authenticate through the cloud. Let's say this, that account platform, that IAM platform that you're using, it's not working or whatever reason. And would you consider, or would you advise them to have redundancy based on that availability, despite confidentiality is at the bottom of the CI triad for OT?
So
It sounds like he's asking if it's okay to have multiple independent methods to remote into some application or platform, as it sounds like is what he wants to know.
yeah. This almost goes back to kind of that redundancy point, to me, kind of a very similar, where what's your appetite for it and what's your staff capability for it. Can you monitor that extra point, that extra entry point? Can you secure that extra entry point for remote access solutions, things like that? I like running as much as I can through a single point, but I also like running as much on-prem as I can. I'm not a huge fan of cloud-based services, cloud-based applications in my OT environment. I don't want to be reliant on something that I could lose just because internet gets cut. So even if I do have remote access, do I have all the needed technology, all the needed workstations where everybody can shift into the office and be in the office and still get everything accomplished with that? Remote connectivity is great. It allows us to respond faster in certain cases, but it's also a risk. So if I'm introducing redundancy on there, that's added risk. Do I have the staff, the money to secure both those technologies now? I don't know that there's a good answer to me. I don't know that there's a good answer to that. I think it's going to vary depending on what the organization's appetite for that is going to be and the business cases for it. Hopefully that kind of answered that. Okay.
Anybody else have any stumpers?
Hello, thank you for the talk. I come from a software engineering background, so we have the ability to spin up like an ephemeral test environment, test our changes before we release them.
Yeah.
Forgive the OT. I have such a bare understanding of OT. Is there a partial ability to do that in the OT world, or because of the physical aspect of it, is that just a pipe dream?
You can absolutely do similar in OT. You can have full sandboxes. You can have test environments. They're costly, but there's no reason that I can't put a lot of that same equipment out there and simulate inputs and outputs. Sure, I probably can't put, a spare motor in my control environment, but can I use something to just even maybe a pilot light to replicate what that output would be for that motor coming on and spinning up? Absolutely. So there are ways you can kind of create that test environment, do it out maybe in a DMZ where it doesn't have a direct link to your live production system. But I would absolutely roll updates out to a test environment, and hopefully you have a good internal kind of QA process for those updates just to ensure that everything's checked before you roll that into your production environment.
Hey Randy, thanks for the talk, it was great. I've got a quick question. So I work with lots of asset owners and operators, supporting them in hiring controls and automation folk, and oftentimes the approach to cybersecurity is woeful or non-existent. I'm just thinking, like, knowing the people that run those businesses, convincing them to part ways with money for could be is going to be challenging. So with regards to the components that you mentioned, the 5 components, like, is it an all or nothing deal with those components, or is there like an order, a priority that, you would take, and why, I guess is the question.
Yeah. Ooh, I can go back. Can I go back? I can't go back. I broke it.
I was asked.
Oh, there we go.
I was asked one more question.
Oh.
How do they go about getting a copy of your presentation?
Let me know, and I'll email it to you.
Okay.
Absolutely, it's not an all or nothing thing. You can break these out and have them each individual. Personally, when we went through rolling a lot of these out, it was stages. They're gonna start building on each other. Best place to start for me is gonna be probably a defensible architecture, because that is so hard to fix if it's designed wrong from the beginning, and if you don't have that defensible architecture. Things like an incident response plan, sure, they're okay, but you're going to be probably using it because you don't have the defensible architecture. You can't have secure remote access without a good defensible architecture. And even, honestly, you can probably get a little more visibility if you have a completely flat network, but, good defensible architecture, you're going to have to go in and evaluate where do you want those taps or those span ports going in so that you can get the best bang for your buck, because those are very expensive. And like you said, sometimes it's hard to convince people to part with that much money for maybe protecting something that they've never seen, like an OT incident response or something. So long-winded way of saying, you can absolutely phase it in, stage them, do them one at a time, start with defensible architecture. Everything really is going to kind of start building on top of that. And that's going to determine kind of how you do the secure remote access, where your sensor placements are, what your OT incident response plan is going to look like.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.